Good afternoon, good morning, everybody, depending on where you are, and welcome to another Eye on Africa. My name is Awasar. I'm Assistant Director for Academic Affairs at MSU African Studies Center. And this is Eye on Africa, our weekly seminary series. I'm very delighted today to have a very distinguished guest, Professor Ndulo, who's gonna talk today about constitution making in Africa, inclusiveness, accountability, and development. I'm gonna give a brief introduction, and I'll pass the floor to him to talk about today's topic. So Dr. Ndulo is William Nelson Cromwell Professor of International and Comparative Law at Cornell Law School, where he also serves as the director of the Berger International Studies Program. He is an internationally recognized scholar in the field of constitution making, governance and institution building, international criminal law, African legal systems, human rights, and international law and foreign direct investment. He has published 23 books, 29 book chapters, and over 100 articles in academic journals. He is Honorary Professor of Law, Faculty of Law, University of Cape Town, Extraordinary Professor of Law, University of the Free State, South Africa, Extraordinary Professor of Law, University of the West Cape, South Africa, and was formerly Professor of Law and Dean of the School of Law at the University of Zambia. He has been an arbitrator under the International Chamber of Commerce, as well as under the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Dispute. He's a legal advisor to the United Nations Assistance Mission to East Timor, legal expert to the United Nations Mission to Kosovo, and legal expert to the United Nations Mission to Afghanistan. Professor Ndulo has served as a legal officer in the International Trade Law Branch of the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, political and legal advisor with the United Nations Mission Observer in South Africa, and to the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General to South Africa. He participated as consultant in the Kenyan, Zimbabwe, and Somalia constitution-making processes. Professor Ndulo is founder of the Southern African Institute for Public Policy and Research and member of its board of directors. He is a member of the board of the African Association of International Law, the advisory committee of Human Rights Watch Africa, and he formerly served as chairperson for Gender Links, a South African NGO. He is currently a member of the UN Secretary General Civil Society Advisory Board on Sexual Exploitation and Abuse in Peacekeeping missions. So we are very honored to have you, Professor Ndulo. And as we were talking, he goes back, his ties with MSU go back. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. But in any case, we are very delighted to have you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sa. And thank you also for the invitation and for all the arrangements that you made to enable me to join you in this talk. I also would like to thank Nicole Mackenzie for also the role you played in arranging my participation. Thank you also again, Dr. Awasa, for that really very, very generous introduction. And I think, as you point out, I'm really quite delighted to connect with the Michigan State. My ties with the Michigan State go a long way. My first job ever in life was when I left high school, was to work as a research assistant to Professor David Wiley. And at the time he was doing his PhD studies in Zambia, and I just left high school, so I became engaged in his household survey. I was taking the questionnaires around, and also my younger brother is actually a graduate of the his PhD is from Michigan State in the economics department. So I'm very proud of my connections to East Lansing and to Michigan State. So coming to the topic that I'm trying to address today, this is the question of constitutional making. I mean, the processes that one looks at when one is trying to, elaborate constitutions for states. Now, in the context of Africa, Africa has actually gone through 3 stages in terms of constitutional making. So we can have the pre-colonial period, and there you had the constitutions. In the case of English-speaking countries, it was mostly the British model, and I mean, they just issued orders in council, and then they organized things that way. There was really no national constitution as such, and I'm sure that it was more or less the same experience with the French-speaking Africa. And then that phase lasted for quite some time, varying lengths. Some countries 50 years, others 100 years, because it's really the colonial period. And then you come to independence. And the independence period, this was negotiated constitutions. And these were constitutions which are actually the terms on which the country was given independence. If you look at the English model, we call it Lancaster model because it came out of the colonial office, and the colonial office was situated in Lancaster House. And what you see is that it's more or less the same kind of constitution. Nigeria, Ghana, Zambia, Kenya, they all end up with the same kind of model. Very centralized power, strong presidents. And I think that was a reflection of the fact that these colonies were ruled by governors. So they replicated the governor in the new constitution. So this was, the independence constitutions. And during that period, of course, the way constitutions were arrived at were really just negotiated between persons who were invited by colonial power, often chiefs, leaders of political parties, and all that. It was not an inclusive process in terms of encouraging participation of the ordinary people. So, and then we had that period lasted, these new constitutions lasted for quite some time. In many cases, the African leaders had promised to democratize those constitutions once they got to power, but in fact, the reverse happened. That in fact, many of them undermined even the little democracy that was in those constitutions, and eventually we ended up with one-party systems of government. And then I think we now deal with this current period, which I think dates from 1989, which we call post-democratization constitutions. And now this debate is still going on. In some countries, they've succeeded to get new constitutions after several attempts. In others, they have not. Kenya is one of those with a new constitution. Zambia, Tanzania are still struggling, to find a new constitution. Nigeria, they still talk about the new constitution. So the difference between the pre-1989 and post-1989 is that post-1999 is driven by a desire to democratize and tremendous pressure by the citizens that we need a democratic constitution. So what I'll try to do is attempt to look at some of the issues that we must try to deal with as we try to address this question of a new constitution. So to me, in terms of general remarks, governance is actually at the heart of Africa's greatest challenges, in my view. And it impacts on the continent's security and development. And I think it's important that, in fact, this issue is recognized and that we try to develop appropriate answers to this. And I think the quagmire that we face is really how to develop inclusive democratic governance, systems which include everybody. Now, in the scheme of things, when you're developing an inclusive system of governance, I think one significant document is, of course, the Constitution. That's the national Constitution. That, of course, means that we have to try and focus on that. It's not the only thing that's important, but it's clearly a foundational document in terms of governance. Now, making a constitution in any country is a major exercise. It presents a myriad of challenges, both in terms of expertise, resources, and logistical support. Now, fortunately, we're not short of models, because of course there are lots of constitutions in the world that are in existence. So we can take a look and we can look at some of them. But I think that we have to remember that the Constitution must address specific societies, because a Constitution must reflect the understanding of a country's history and also its traditions and its politics. I don't think that you can simply go and pick up a document from somewhere because it works in Spain and introduce it in Ghana, it will work. No, that works only with equipment. The Constitution has to reflect society. It's not like a fridge, which of course, as long as you write voltage, it will work. So it's very important to realize that. So the question then becomes that what does one identify as the challenges? I think, to me, a serious search for a constitution process in Africa must first address the question of inclusiveness, that it ensures that actually all persons are included. So it must encourage competitive multi-party engagement, sound economic governance, and the widest citizen participation. And I think there are several conditions that are very specific to Africa. First of all, I think there's need to have a debate as to what kind of society you want to create. And here I'm suggesting that before a country embarks on constitution making, it must first examine itself as what exactly do we want to create? Are we creating a multiracial society, or are we creating a multi-religious society? So I think that we have to address that. There's also, and the South Africans, for example, I think I would argue, if you look at their process, we look at 92, 93 constitution, but actually the process of thinking about what kind of South Africa they wanted started in 1955 with the Freedom Charter. And you can see how they relied on that. And even when in 93, they developed the first constitution, which is the one that was used for 94 elections, there was almost a whole year of debating what kind of society, non-sexist, non-racial, and all those issues were debated. And then I think we have to realize that there's need to create national unity or cohesion so that we can actually generate social and political power. And I think this must be a deliberate effort. We also have to accommodate the vast ethnic diversity that exists in these countries. We cannot afford to ignore the fact that these are diverse societies. And Africa is not unique in being diverse. We often talk about tribes as if they are a peculiar occurrence only in Africa. India, which is considered to be the biggest democracy in the world, has well over 300 tribes. The question with ethnicity is management. How do you want to manage it so that it, in fact, it contributes to the growth of the society? And the problem that we face, of course, in managing ethnicity is that very often we find that ethnicity has been growing rather than actually decreasing. And unfortunately, it's even more significant among the elites. And I think the elites tend to use it for their own political gains. And I think we must also deal with the questions of minorities in the communities, that how do you address that issue? And there's also the question of preparing the people to document the Constitution, which is unfamiliar. They're not familiar with this kind of arrangement. And I think that a deliberate efforts have to be made to ensure that people understand what this process is about. And I think it must also address the temptations of arrogance and discrimination and abuse of power. So how do you ensure that in power, persons who get to power are accountable and that we actually ensure that we do control these vices? We also have to deal with the question of gender equality. There are values and traditional roles that are assigned to women, and I think we have to address that in the sense that a constitution must, in fact, ensure that all persons are equal. And I think, in my view, the goal should be, as the Beijing conference declared, to remove all obstacles to women's active participation in all spheres of public life and private life through full and equal share in economic, social, cultural, and political decision making. There's also a need to ensure that we have free press and a vibrant and free press, because these are important third or fourth estate, as sometimes they are referred to. There's also need to reform the security sector. The security sector, unreformed, will in fact undermine democratic governance. Because the goal here should be that the security sector should underpin democratic practice. And in fact, I think that it should fall under civilian supervision. Very, very important. There's also need to encourage strong civil society. It provides checks and balances, and it's absolutely essential in a democratic state. As Nabwenzi observed, he said that the accountability of government, the citizen, which is a cardinal element of democracy, can scarcely be maintained without a civil society that is truly autonomous from government. There's also need, of course, to develop independent civil service, because the civil service is crucial in the delivery of programs, delivery of development. We have to ensure that it's not only is it independent, but it is competent. There's a problem of how we handle executive power. As I mentioned, when you look at the independence constitutions, they were over-centralized in terms of the power of the presidency. And presidentialism in Africa has tended towards dictatorship and tyranny. So we have to introduce measures within the constitution which ensure that we curb this power. And finally, I think, to me, constitutions must respond to the need to devolve power to local communities. And here, I'm not talking about decentralization in centralism, where the government is just establishing itself in districts, but no, actually giving local people power. It promotes accountability, but it also is inclusive. It ensures that people belong to the state and they see themselves as belonging to the state. Additionally, I think as we look at constitution making, we must look at constitutions as a liberating document. It should be seen as the document that liberates the people so that they can actually realize their potential. And I think this is crucial to me, that this must be a document that you see as actually liberating you. And people must be happy to see this is our constitution. And I think the true mark of whether a constitution is seen as a national constitution by individuals is an observation that was made by Chief Justice, the first non-white Chief Justice of South Africa, Justice Mohammed. He helped in the Namibian constitution. And he said that, you see, a constitution must be like an autobiography. When a person looks in the constitution, they must see that they see themselves in it. Say, oh yes, it's talking to me. That's really the true mark of a truly national document, that everybody, men, women, gay, whatever, everybody should be able to see themselves, that this is talking to me. Now, there's always the question of external actors, that, what is the role of external actors? There is no doubt widespread support for constitutional making and democratization worldwide. You can look at the UN resolutions. The UN General Assembly has on several occasions requested that the UN system assist countries in developing a constitution. And they played a critical role in the places like Namibia, for example, and East Timor. It's also something that you see in the Millennium Challenge, sort of the Millennium Summit, did in fact make also pronouncements about the need for good governance. But you can also look at the African Constitutive Act. It firmly enshrines in Article 3 and 4 support for democratic governance. And that's the African Union Act. It says that it's actually totally committed to that. So to promote promotion of democratic principles and protection of human rights and good governance. And it's not only that, even if you look at the fact that since then, since the charter, the AU has developed an African Charter on democracy and elections and good governance. And if you look through that charter, it's a total commitment to democratization. NEPAD made the link that, in fact, insofar as NEPAD is concerned, they don't see that Africa can develop unless they resolve the question of governance. But I think that as we look at external participation, we must also be very careful in a sense that we have to be clear as to what role externals can play in a process. Because the constitution must be locally driven, must be driven by the people of that country. Outsiders can help, but I think it's important that the product is local and is driven by local stakeholders. How can international actors help? I think the international actors, they can play a huge role if they realize that their role is to support the process. And they should refrain from being prescriptive. They should support the process. And I think that's a key measurement that one should use, that are they supporting the process or are they trying to be prescriptive? It's great temptation to impose your own model because you think that's the best. And of course, that's a huge problem. There's also sometimes a disadvantage when you get external actors coming into processes. My own experience is that you end up spending a lot of time explaining what's going on because they don't have the background. And I think that's why, to me, the key role they can play is one of supporting the process. And we have to guard against the uncritical adoption of foreign models. They cannot work. And as Nabwenzi pointed out, he said the spirit of laws and the institution of a state, unlike the laws of institutions themselves, is not an exportable commodity. You have to develop it from the ground. It cannot be packaged, it cannot be transported. So in this regard, I think the experts should participate in constitution making as partners with local experts. Now, okay, so I've given you sort of like a broad goals of what we should aim to achieve. So what are the lessons that we have learned so far in terms of the processes that have gone on? First, I think that the South African process, for example, teaches us that even before you start writing the Constitution, you should articulate agreed upon principles that are going to be in the Constitution. Like, agree independence of the judiciary, you agree on devolution, you agree on equality. So you outline those principles. And as you're developing the Constitution, you measure, your progress against those instruments. I think it's very important to have that kind of framework. And then the second point, lesson learned, is that we should always try to be very clear as to what society we want to create. What is it that we're actually trying to do? And that this is an important understanding and makes it easier for those that are working on developing a constitution. And again here, I refer to the South African process in the sense that we look at it in terms of 1996 constitution, but actually the debate as to the future South Africa starts in 1955 with the Freedom Charter. And it was interesting to see in 1993, when they're developing the 93 constitution, that frequent references were made to the Charter of 1955. I mean, I was lucky to be present in those negotiations, and you see that, this had tremendous influence, and they actually thought about what you want to do. So another lesson learned is that we must design an inclusive process, a process that includes everybody. How you ensure that, of course, is a big challenge. There are models in terms of Constitutional Assembly, there are commissions, there are this, but the critical point should be that, in fact, this is an inclusive process. And there's tremendous benefit in all the people participating in a constitution because there's ownership involved. They feel like they're owners. And as Mohammed pointed out, the end product, they can see themselves in it. They say, oh yes, this thing is talking to me. So I see, for example, now if you go to Kenya, Kenyans are very proud of their constitution. They have these little books and they're always quoting the constitution, but it's the process that it included them. And Kenya did not get it right first because, Kenya had independence in 1963. They had, Wako draft. They had even a referendum in 2000, which rejected a draft constitution. So it was a continuous process. They had the Bomas draft. It was rejected. And I think the critical point for Kenya was the violence that happened after the elections of 2007, where the country faced collapse. And I think it was then realized that we have to do something about that. It's sad that it had to take that to actually drive the process. So another lesson learned, I think, when you're developing a constitution, the process is as important as the substance. It's not about just getting things right in the end. If people don't belong, they don't feel they are belonging to this process, it's not enough that you have an excellent draft. They will not accept it. So my point here is that the process of developing the constitution is as important as its substance. Also, further, we have to decide how you make decisions when you're developing a constitution. How do you adopt the provisions? I think the worst thing you can do is to encourage voting among stakeholders. Because what happens then is that those who lose on one provision, they hold a grudge and try to cause problems later on. One of the remarkable things about the South African process, I don't know whether many of you realize, that the South African constitutions of 96 and 93 were adopted without ever any vote. It was consensus. So they would say, we have to talk about the provision until we all agreed. And they would talk and talk and talk. So there was no record of any voting at all. And that was deliberate. It was to ensure that people are included. Another mechanism that was used was that the chairing of the Constitutional Conference revolved around all stakeholders. Every week, another party was chairing the meeting. So everybody was treated like equally and their contributions are respected. And I think it's very, very important that you address those issues. Now, of course, after the elaboration of the Constitution, the next issue is the one of adoption. That how do you actually adopt a constitution? Very often, of course, people advocate for a referendum. I think a referendum is a good thing. You know, it can legitimize a constitution and that can ensure maximum legitimacy, but it can also end up boxing you into a corner. Because if in fact the constitution is rejected by referendum, there's no other thing to do. There's no other option, it's over. So that's why it's critical that you view the constitution as not a place to negotiate provisions, but as a place of legitimizing the process, to involve the people. And that means that you must ensure that by the time you go to a referendum, everything in the constitution is accepted and is acceptable. Now again, forgive me for going back to the South African experience, because I'm very familiar with it. Now, it's over there, if you look at the 96 Constitution, it was said that it should be adopted by referendum. But because of the processes that I pointed out to you, actually there was no referendum held, because at the end of the process, nobody was against it. So all the parties said, but referendum for what? Who is going to campaign against this thing? We all agree. So, and that's, I think, what you should aim at, that the referendum should be used as a way of legitimizing the process. It's important sometimes in the context of ensuring that you prevent dictatorial tendencies by the government, because of course they would like to dictate the kind of document that comes out. And that's one of the biggest challenges. How do you ensure that this is not a document that is manipulated? And that's why I emphasize the point that process is as important as the substance. So, another process that demonstrated the folliness of having a referendum if you're not ready was actually the Zimbabwean constitution in 2000. Mugabe pushed through this constitution and held a referendum, and the referendum rejected it, and that was the end. There was no option. Where do you go from there? And so those are, I think, very critical things that one has to look at. Also, as we develop a constitution, I think we should emphasize on the question of that you develop. One of the principles that I forgot to mention at the beginning is to develop the rule of law. Constitutionalism is critical, that we view that every action should be regularized by the Constitution. Any action that's not backed by Constitution is invalid, actually, because Parliament or anybody else has only as much power as the Constitution gives them. And one of our problems in Africa is that we have what Cornell called constitutions without constitutionalism. So we have to ensure that how do we achieve this? What do we do in that context? Now, I try to conclude so that we can have a lot of time to discuss some of these issues. Often people say, well, you can have a good document, but it doesn't matter. Leaders don't obey it and all that. That's not a problem that's unique to Africa. There's no constitution in the world that implements itself. A constitution is not self-executing. The guarantors of a constitution are the people. So unless the people of that country demand that the constitution is obeyed, there's no way a constitution is going to be meaningful in that country, because it's not self-implementing. There's no law that implements itself. And that's the significance of the role of civil society, the role of society. So we have ourselves to blame if in fact the constitution is not being obeyed, because we are the ones, we are the ultimate power. Even in terms of drafting, most constitutions say that the people, we give ourselves this constitution. So we don't, nobody, not the IMF or World Bank is going to come and try and implement a constitution for you. It's not possible. both for developing and developed states. It has to be the people themselves. Now, to conclude, I said, I think that often, to me, there are two root causes of the problem of constitutionalism in Africa. The colonial experience, the legacy, the models. Colonialism was not democratic, and it didn't provide a good legacy. The legacy it provided was dictatorship, basically. Now, of course, we do rightly blame colonialism for what exists, but I think that we must also try to take responsibility for what's going on. And we need to come to terms with that. The responsibility of transforming the societies is ours. We have to do it. No one is going to do that. There is also the need to promote values, constitutional values, values of tolerance in society. You know, you can have a constitution that says tolerate the opposition, but you have no values of that. You cannot legislate tolerance. It has to be because people believe in it and they embrace the value of tolerance. So these documents must be used to promote those kinds of ideas so that we can begin to have a viable society. And to me, what we need to focus on is establishing a stable political order. And the starting point is not the only, but the major starting point in this whole endeavor is clearly, to me, a good constitution. And I think that we should acknowledge that. And such a stable political order can only be achieved by establishing a constitutional order that is legitimate, credible, and enduring, and which is structurally accessible to the people without compromising the integrity and effectiveness of the process of governance. So, and I think, to me, that is always an important goal to keep in mind as you are discussing the questions of constitutions. So I thank you very much for your attention and look forward to having a discussion on some of the issues that I've raised. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ndulo, for that explanation. And I really like this concept of a constitution as an autobiography. And my question to you is, from your experience, is there an example out there in Africa where the traditional ways of self-government has been included? Because we cannot talk about autobiography, we're talking about the traditional ways. What role has
traditional authority
played in constitution making in Africa?
Yeah, that's an excellent point that you have raised, and I didn't touch on it, and I think I should have. One of the legacies of colonial rule is really kind of like this messing up of the traditional rulers in terms of exploiting them for the promotion of the interests of the colonial powers. And then, of course, the independence constitutions in most African countries, they recognize traditional authority, but they're not really part and parcel of the modern structures of government. They're not included at all. And I think that when we consider devolution, one of the major issues that we have to consider is how do we incorporate traditional rulers, because they exist and they have some influence in society. So you cannot ignore them, because what you're doing is we're running parallel systems of government. In terms of examples where I'm fascinated by what India has done, because India has what they call a patriarchal system, and they included in local government level. There's a role. We find that the traditional rulers were included in this system. It's an important thing, and we have to address it, because at the moment in Africa, there is recognition of traditional authority, and we always talk about them proudly. But in fact, they are not included in the modern constitutional system. When you look at Senegalese constitution or look at Ghanaian constitution, it doesn't deal with the powers of chiefs. They're just there on their own. And I think that's a very dangerous situation. Yeah. To me, they could be included at the level of, when you're considering devolution, that what kind of structure can you come up which devolves power to the local communities. And then, yeah. Now, of course, the traditional authorities themselves are not exempt from criticism, in the sense that as we bring them on board, we also have to make sure that we reform aspects which are not good. I mean, the gender biases, for example, and all those kind of issues. Yeah, but it's an issue that we have to deal with in Africa, I think.
Thank you so much. So Leonidas has a question. These are all good ideas. However, the problem is the implementation. What are the institutions in place in Africa to ensure that the constitutions are protected? In England, the glorious revolution that created the independent parliament. Should AU create an army to send to each country to counteract national armies created to protect the dictators and the governing elites?
Yeah, so for me, as I said, the people who can safeguard the constitution are the people of Senegal, the people of Ghana. That's their constitution. That's their responsibility. There is no country in the world which has a constitution which implements itself. A law does not implement itself by nature, because you pass it, but in order to ensure that it works, people must demand that it's observed. So it goes to this, and it's actually reflected in all constitutions, in the sense that if you look at the national constitution, it talks about we, the people, give you power to do this. So it is a question of exercising that power, demanding that that happens. Whether you're talking about France or UK, there is nothing can enforce the British law without the society demanding. What makes the politicians obey that law is that they are afraid that they cannot afford to do those things. The composition of an army, to me, that cannot work. First of all, there are logistical issues. I mean, there are costs, but also there's not any real agreement in terms of like one plan in terms of, okay, this is what you need to do in order to address democracy in Zimbabwe or somewhere else. And I think trying to wait on others to help a country is folly, because it doesn't work. It has to be, that's why I think we have to make sure that these values are enhanced and people can demand that, no, we don't want to accept this. It's difficult, but that's the only way, really. Whether you're talking about developed states or developing countries, it's the same.
Thank you. I think Leo wants to follow up. I'm gonna let him join the conversation alive. Let me unmute.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk, Dr. Sarr. Professor Ndulo, this is a very nice talk, and it's coming at the right time, I think. Well, at least for me, I've been actually reading the book of Darren Acemoglu on why nations fail. And throughout the history of the mankind, from Roman empires to today, humans have fought to have that freedom and to be able to, to govern themselves and prosper. But the history has taught us that if there is no force that counteract the elite, those who are protecting their interest, those good ideas are never going to happen, right? So you're not going to do something. That's why we are here in the United States instead of being in Ghana or Nigeria or Rwanda, because we know that if you start talking, the army is going to kill you. So what is that need to be done to actually protect those people so they can actually be able to create the balance, check and balance system without a fear of being prosecuted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, again, of course, the starting point, I think you rightly pointed out, is having a good constitution. But in the end, there is the enforcement aspect. And here, I think that even within Africa, there are examples we can learn. I mean, there are countries that are running quite well constitutionally. And then you ask yourself, why is that happening? Of course, people demand that that's happening. Because whether you're in France or you are in Britain, or even in the United States, you saw it with respect to Trump and the Constitution. I mean, a leader can try to do all kinds of IDF.
I'm gonna.
Yeah, thanks. So you can see that, I mean, the critical thing is people to demand. Leaders are going to abuse power unless they're checked. So that's quite critical. And I think that we can look at examples. You know, for example, for me, I look at Namibia. Namibia really has, even their constitution has not been amended since they started. They have regular elections. They've done very well. And one could argue Botswana too. There's no problem. You have to force accountability. Politicians are not going to account on their own. So what you're having is a framework. The Constitution is a framework for operations, but it's obviously important to ensure that that framework is adequate to do that. But then in the end, the power really is with the people. You and me, we have to demand that the government obeys the laws. And that's, I think, a very challenging thing. But there's no unique solution to this issue apart from the people. And I keep on emphasizing that if you look at any constitution, whether US or anything, they talk about we the people, do this. Because it's you must demand that this is wrong, you cannot do this. You see, laws don't execute themselves. They don't implement themselves. There's no way a law can implement itself. It's the people.
Professor Wiley, do you want to raise your hand?
You're mute. I think he's mute.
Can you unmute yourself?
You're mute. He doesn't realize that he's mute.
I think you can unmute him if you're that.
I'm trying. Okay, I think I've done it now.
Good.
Let me just say, it's an honor to us to have a global reputed scholar on constitutionalism in the world of globalists, and Lord knows, as is on our television, that we need some guidance in that regard as well. I just wanted to add, for those of you who may not be aware of, that Ndulo in UN circles is really regarded as one of the experts globally to pull in for a new country dealing with constitutionalism problems, and a longtime friend running a distinguished social science institute. And another little family secret of Professor Ndulo is that his brother, Maninga Ndulo, did his PhD at MSU, the first African to gain a PhD in the Department of Economics, as distinct from agricultural economics, and has been the Dean of Social Science at the University of Zambia. So we have with us today the former Dean of the Law School in Zambia. And so we have a distinguished academic family here. And it's wonderful to have worked with them both in Zambia. But I wanted to toss you a question on constitutionalism and ethnicity. You know, I wonder how you would comment on the salience of the Nigerian constitution in dealing with the highly institutionalized three-region ethnicity problems of Nigeria, and to be more contemporary, in Ethiopia now with the Tigrinya speakers in conflict with the Amhara speakers and their Oromenya speakers. How do good constitutions and good practice around constitutions overcome these kinds of entrenched ethnicities?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave, for those kind remarks about my work. I told them earlier on, you weren't here, that I got my first job from you, working in Matero. Yeah, when I just left high school and Dave was doing his PhD. And yeah, it was great. And since then, we've been close. So I appreciate the relationship very much. Yeah, now coming to the question, a very important question, because one of the things that I mentioned at the beginning was that in Africa, we have to realize that we're dealing with multi-ethnic societies. And so the question that comes up, first, before I come to the question, the thing is that first, it's not unique that Africa has ethnic groups. Because if you've been to India, I mean, there are 300, well, over 300 ethnic groups in India. So, you know, but we also know that ethnicity has been a big problem in many places, you know, Sri Lanka, this and that, everywhere. So the question that I think constitutions should address is that you have to address the management of ethnicity. And the thing that causes problems is marginalization. When groups feel that they are marginalized. And then I think you can address those issues in the Constitution. I love the phrase I heard in South Africa that, you know, tribes, languages are a natural resource of a country. You know, just like your copper or your oil is what makes Nigeria. It's a plus. So you should actually see it as a positive thing. But the problem is that, of course, politicians misuse this ethnicity, and of course they use this to advance their own goals. So I think one of the lessons that, for example, in the South African Constitution that addressing this issue, you know, they declared that all South African languages are national languages, that they all have equal status. Now, of course, in reality, English and Afrikaans is spoken more than the others and the more resources, but they guaranteed that in the Constitution. And you can actually ask for translation for things, you know. But not only that, they set up in the Constitution a language development fund, you know. So if you're really concerned about developing your language and all that, you can actually get funding, you know, to try and do that. And I think the key thing is to recognize that they exist and that we have to manage them. Now, one of the ways of managing them is, of course, devolution, that you devolve power to lower levels. But that has also its shortcomings, because it's when you create provinces, that happened in Nigeria and in Uganda too. When you create provinces, you create new minorities. So there are new demands for more, more provinces. Each time you create a district, there's a new minority in that group. So it's always a constant issue. But to me, you must address that. And then in the Constitution, ensuring inclusivity means that you must have policies on, for example, the appointments, ensuring that there's diversity. And the Kenyan Constitution, for example, has a provision that you cannot have, a department which is like 80% to this one group of people, that you have to show diversity. So that way you're encouraging something. And hopefully with time, people start to see that the whole is better than the division. But I think it's a question of looking at how do you manage this thing. At the moment, our politicians tend to use ethnicity for their own interests. very selfish interest, because in the end, when you're suffering from high prices or everybody, they don't distinguish between this tribe or that tribe. Everybody suffers, you know. But you're made to believe that actually if you elect somebody from your place, then it's okay. Yeah, and I think, but exclusion, marginalization, once you marginalize people, that's one of the major sources of conflict. When people feel that they're marginalized, they resort to fighting. Yeah, I'm sure I don't answer your question, but because it is a big problem, that's why I'm not able to answer it. We have to keep thinking about it in terms of how do we do it. But for me, it's important to recognize that it exists in a country and then take deliberate efforts to respond to it by taking measures which includes everybody. I mean, one of the things we've learned is if you make choices over languages, you cause a lot of problems. This is a Sri Lankan situation, isn't it? You know, you say, oh, this is going to be this language and forget about the other guys. It doesn't work. You know, it doesn't work. And you have to be inclusive all the time. Mm.
Yeah, well, good. I think your point about marginalization is a very important one. In fact, apparently there was an article out today that a high proportion of the insurrectionists in Washington, in fact, were people who had somewhere in their history dire economic problems that made them feel to be marginal members of American society. So, and I think you're right. That is the key. And the problem is, you got different people feel marginalized at different times. If you think of the Amhara community in Ethiopia, and that felt for a long time that they were marginalized by the Tigrinya governors.
Absolutely.
And Addis, and so these connections. But anyway, that's helpful, and thank you very much for that.
Yeah, you know, another example of trying to deal with this question of marginalization. Actually, if you look at the South African Constitution '93, you see the ANC was before the agreement. ANC never wanted this proportional representation because actually they thought this was a scheme to dilute black power and that kind of thing. So they fought against that. It was later that they got converted to it. But when you look at it, you will see that actually it helped the country in terms of inclusion. Because, for example, if they had a constituency-based election in South Africa in '94, I don't think any whites would have won seats to parliament because you need a concentration to produce a result to win a seat. Whereas in proportional representation, you spread. You know, it doesn't matter where your people are. It's a question of the numbers put together, and then you get a seat. So that way it was more inclusive. And I think after that, you know, the ANC bought the idea, and then now, of course, it's established. It's very much established. But we also discovered that in countries where they have proportional representation, Mozambique, South Africa, and all that, they have high representation of women in politics. Because again, it's a way of actually defeating these efforts to marginalize women. So if you look at Mozambique today, I think it's like 45% parliament women. South Africa is in the same range too. Yeah, so it can also be used as a measure to actually include women as marginalized groups into the political system. And you can mix the two. You don't have to have one system because there are countries which have, for Senate, you have proportional representation, and for the House, you have one district, one member, whatever. You can mix the system.
Yeah, helpful. Okay, thank you for that. And a very, very interesting talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Jonathan has a question about democracy and constitution being foreign to Africa. He said, do you think this is the reason most political leaders in Africa abuse their country's constitutions and citizens' powerlessness in making leaders obey the constitution? So what is the way forward?
Well, I don't think that the democracy is foreign to Africa. Actually, what's amazing, when you look at dictatorship in terms of centralization of power in the presidency, that's a colonial inheritance. You see, Africans actually continuing in the colonial rule when you look at it. Because you see, in the colonies, countries were ruled by a very strong governor, you know, and the governor appointed everybody and moved around and that kind of thing. And the colonial constitution is a legacy of that. And what you see is with this very strong president. So to me, decentralization is an African thing. African society was decentralized. And centralization is actually a colonial legacy, which we've embraced and now think that it was. And when you talk about democracy, I mean, I think that the word, to me, can simply be defined as people, you know, being consulted, being participating. And I don't agree that it is not, you know, African. You see, one of the problems with that is I have the same problem with the human rights when people argue that, oh, the human rights are Western concepts and all that. But if you look at it historically, actually it's Western society which has been guilty of the most egregious human rights violations, you know, slavery, genocide, colonialism, and all that. And then, but we want to give them credit that they invented rights. I don't think so. Rights are there in every society. What society survives which believes that you can kill each other? It doesn't survive. You know, so what society accepts that people can be tortured? These are norms which are natural to all societies. And I think we have to embrace that and claim them, that they are as much ours as anybody else's, that it's not copying from anybody. Yeah, so I mean, that would be my view in terms of the way I look at this debate about democracy being Western or not Western. I just think it is African because it's about consultation. It's about people participating in decision making.
Thank you. Jamie has a question. What is the relationship between political parties and constitutional processes?
Yeah, that's, you know, thanks. That's a very good question too. Now, the political parties, of course, are units for mobilization. And you have to have them in terms of the political arrangements. But one of the biggest challenges in Africa, and I think that's one thing that I should have mentioned, I have the view that we must go towards party funding, you know, because opposition parties are very disadvantaged when it comes to, you know, ruling parties. Ruling parties abuse government resources, they abuse everything, you know, the media, government media, and all that. And if you're in opposition, you cannot raise funds because the people are poor and they're really challenged. So there is need to address this issue because you have to regard them as critical to democracy itself, to participation, because there are points of mobilization. But we can go further than that. But I think we should also insist that the political parties themselves are democratic. That is that there's nothing wrong with requiring them to be to have regular elections in a political party, that otherwise you don't qualify for funding or anything like that. Because I think that if we have a party that's democratic, it's more likely that it will subscribe to democracy when it takes central power, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay. I think you already touched on this, but I'm going to read it. Michael asked, so he first said, fantastic talk. It seems like the major obstacle in most African countries to constitutional reform is political will, not public opinion or lack of idea. How to get incumbent governments to promote constitutional change when the status quo is often in their own interest?
Yeah, thanks. Again, I mean, a very good question too. And you saw this, I mean, in Kenya. If you look at Kenya, as I pointed out, Kenya started 63 constitution. Then they had other attempts, including the Wako constitution, which failed. Then they had the Bomas draft and all that. And what you realize is that this is often the struggle between the elites who are in power, who are abusing the system, and of course the constitution, and the ordinary people. And that's why it's very important that you ensure that the process is open and participatory, because the goals of NGOs and ordinary people is for democratization and all that. But that's not the goal of the elites. The elites is to capture power. And you have to make sure that somehow you avoid that. That how do you deal with that? And the only way to deal with it is really ensuring that you have a transparent system and that there's full participation. And you have to fight for it. But even more, I would go further, that one of the things that happens, and I saw this in Kenya, and I'm sure Kenyans would agree with me, is that, you know, when the elites see that, okay, they have no choice, they have to agree to the constitution now because the demands are overwhelming, they do. The unfortunate thing is that the implementation of the new constitution is often left to them because they're the ones in government, you know. So again, you have a struggle. That suggests that your struggle for a constitutional democracy should not end at the constitution, because you must then fight for implementation. And these guys who are in power are not interested, you know, in having a reformed security sector which doesn't listen to them in terms of taking commands. They're not interested in an independent judiciary because they want a judiciary which, you know, doesn't do anything when they go wrong. So you can see that the objectives of the two groups are not the same. And you have to make sure that we understand that it's a continuous struggle, that even after adoption, we have to fight for implementation. Because the people that are going to be in charge of implementation are going to be people who actually don't like the document, and they'll try to frustrate it.
Thank you very much. Another question from Jeff. Thank you for excellent talk, Prof. And an often overlooked aspect of constitutions is the rules that are embedded in them regarding how to change them. When constitutions are hard to change, you can have situations like the US faces of anachronistic or discriminatory institutions being difficult to change. On the other hand, if constitutions are too easy to change, these basic documents just become tools of whomever is in power at the moment. How should we strike this balance?
Yeah, and I think the constitutional amendment is a big challenge. And now, you see there the conflicting position would be that once you've got a good constitution, you want it to stay that way. So you want to protect it from amendments. But the solution, some countries think like, okay, you have a constitution, no amendment. But then again, that's not possible because you can't foresee everything. So the approach that's taken in most countries, like if you look at Kenya or South Africa, is that to amend the constitution is made very difficult. In that you require very high majorities, but in some countries they require even majority of provinces to go along. So that's one of the things that you see that it's a challenge, because it's very tempting for people in power to continuously change the constitution and weaken it. And so you have to address that. And I think you have to strike a balance between very difficult to amend and impossible to amend. You don't, you'd like some room in case there are things you never foresaw, because we're dealing with human beings, so, and human society. So there might be some things that you want to cater for, but it should be very difficult to change a constitution, because otherwise it's the same level as an ordinary law, and you don't want to make it the same as an ordinary law, because ordinary law takes its legitimacy from this ground norm, this big norm, the central norm in any state.
Thank you.
Okay.
Another question. Professor Ndulo, thank you for an edifying discussion. Can society, I think it's kind of related, outgrow the existing, how often should a constitution be rewritten?
Rewritten, oh. Yeah, well, I think that, I mean, once you have a good constitution, I think they should kind of try to stick to it, because there's no point in changing it. You want to make sure that its values now really permeate the whole society. And although we think of African constitutions that are being changed all the time, they're actually good examples. I mean, Namibia hasn't changed its constitution since 1989. So that's quite some time now. And there are no moves to change it. Botswana is an interesting example where they haven't changed the constitution since 1968. So they are quite happy with the way it functions, you know. So, and then of course, South Africa also hasn't really changed its constitution since '96. So there are countries now that are building up this reputation that, you know, and then the critical thing, and that's why it's so important to get it right from the beginning. And to get it right is, of course, also a problem in terms of detail versus generality, in that the more detailed the constitution is, the more likely that it will cause problems and you need to amend it. So you have to strike a balance that it should govern the fundamental norms in a society, you know, how, and I think it should be easy. To me, it should be a good idea to agree on a constitution. You can disagree about everything else. I mean, implementing policies later on at political level, but at least agree on the fundamentals in terms of this is the structure we're going to have of governance. And then we start to defend it. And then we try to promote the values so that people can embrace it and claim it as their own, you know. Yeah, I'm not sure that I answered the question because it's a difficult question, but basically it's really striving to get a good document that you should. And once you do that, I think you should try to defend it. And to me, a good constitution is one that's not too detailed. If you look at the constitution in the Congo, you know, Congo, Kinshasa, I mean, it's like 500 pages, you know, and I mean, that's not a good thing because it means that you must be covering just so much stuff that a lot of it is not necessary in the constitution and it's going to cause you trouble when you want to make change. Yeah.
Alien has a question about African constitutions reproducing Western constitutions.
Constitution. Mm-hmm.
And if there is, do you think there is a need for a deep epistemic shift in the process of constitution making in Africa?
Yeah, I think historically, like I pointed out, when you look at African states, the independence constitution was completely foreign. Because it was the condition on which the country was given independence. In the case of the former British, it's actually an act of the British Parliament, the first constitution, because they passed a law to say Zambia will be independent under this order and under this document. So it's actually a British act. So those were completely foreign. And now what marked those constitutions also was the lack of participation of people in the process. You had people invited by the colonial power, you know, political party, who they chose, chiefs, whatever, and they came out with a document. Now the new ones that were, I mean, after that, of course, we had one-party states, we had all these things which are completely crazy, and they don't really represent any system except that it was invented at home in Africa. And then now we have this post-democratization period. And I think here we should not be trying to look at a foreign model. To me, it should come from the people themselves, that it should reflect the history of the country. You see, like Mabwezi said, he says, you see, a constitution is not like you're buying a fridge. That if I take a fridge to Senegal, as long as I've got the right electricity to work, a constitution is a product of society. And it can only work when it reflects the society in which it is. If it doesn't, it will not work. So I think we have to move away from that. Now, of course, when you're drafting constitutions, as I pointed out, you do get support from others, you know, who come out with the models and all that. And that's why I was cautioning that restrict foreign experts to support in terms of the process. They should not be prescriptive. Coming there to tell you that the American Constitution is the best. No, we don't want to hear that. We want to see what's good for Senegal. And that means that Senegal must discuss what is Senegalese society about and what does it want? What kind of society does it want to build? And then evolve from there. Yeah.
Thank you so very much for a very excellent discussion and excellent questions also from the audience. I don't think there are any more questions. No more questions. Let me check here. Okay, so I think that's it. Thank you so much, again, Professor, for accepting our invitation, sharing these great ideas and thought with us. And thank you everybody for attending today. And I hope to see you next Thursday. Bye.
Thank you very, very much for the invitation and also for the questions. I really learned so much myself during the discussion. You reflect on things, so it's a continuous process. So next time I talk about it or write something, I will address some of the issues that you have been raising. So thank you very, very much, really.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye. Bye.